We're joined by Susan McKay, journalist, who has written quite a bit about, Susan McKay is the other person, has written quite a bit about the Jean McConville issue, and Gerry Toomey, who is much involved in the Boston College Oral History Project, and it was that project that organised interviews with Brendan Hughes and Dolores Price, both now deceased, both IRA leaders, both of whom have said that Gerry Adams was involved in the killing of Jean McConville. Let's talk a bit about the killing of Jean McConville first, Susan. What is, as far as you know, is the evidence that Gerry Adams had any involvement with it?
Well, he has been said to have been involved by several senior Republican figures who would have known, and I think that his denials of involvement are seriously undermined, unfortunately for him, by the fact that he denies that he was even in the IRA. So given that we cannot possibly credibly believe that he wasn't in the IRA, we can't then take seriously his denials that he wasn't involved in the Jean McConville case, given that senior figures are saying that he was, and that all the evidence seems to point to the fact that he was a senior figure in the IRA in West Belfast at that time.
People are speculating tonight that he may be charged with in connection with the murder of Jean McConville. What possible evidence is there to charge him, as far as you know?
I don't think that there's any prospect that Gerry Adams could be convicted in relation to this murder, and I notice in one of the papers tonight that Helen McHenry, Jean McConville's very brave and outspoken daughter, has said the same, that she doesn't actually believe that he will end up being convicted of it. It would all be hearsay evidence, and it's extremely unlikely that Ivor Bell is going to talk in court about this. So, and the other people who have spoken extensively about it are, as you said in your intro, dead. So it's extremely unlikely that it's ever...
The tapes themselves couldn't really get into evidence. I can't see how they could.
No. I mean, Jean McConville was one of up around 400 people who were killed in 1972, and a great many of the 3,600 people who were killed in the course of the conflict in the North have not got justice, will not get justice. I mean, I think when Sinn Féin talks about this being about political policing, what's political about the policing of it is in fact the fact that the politicians have left this to the police, and they shouldn't have. They need to find some mechanism to deal with these issues in a fair and way which is compatible with everybody's right to justice. It's totally wrong that this should be a matter for the police, and that certain cases are getting attention and others aren't.
Gerry, this inquiry and the Gerry Adams detention arises, it seems, from the Boston College tapes, and where tapes where Dolores Price says that he was involved. She acknowledges that she was involved, I understand, in the killing of Jean McConville, but says that Gerry Adams ordered it. And similarly, Brendan Hughes, who was the close associate in the IRA with Gerry Adams, says that Gerry Adams ordered it. Yet Dolores Price and Brendan Hughes didn't ever anticipate that their interviews would ever be used for these purposes. Mm-hmm. There's a problem here.
Well, yes, these interviews were done as a way of gathering the history of the conflict, and they are not a way of gathering criminal evidence, and they were never meant to be getting criminal evidence or used as criminal evidence. And the problem is with the subpoenaing of these records and the chilling effect that it's had on people who are willing to come forward and tell their story, which is our history that we're being denied. It shuts down everything in terms of being able to get to the truth. And it's very important, I think, as Susan said, that the politicians need to step forward and figure out a way to deal with the past that is not left to the police. Because if it's left to the police and it's left to the state, we will have a sanitized version of the past that lets the state off the hook.
Your husband was...
Sorry, could I just correct you there? Actually, Dolores Price first gave her statement about this to Alison Morris in the Irish News when she was alive,
That's
obviously.
right, yeah.
And so I think that Dolores Price would have been perfectly happy to go into court and stand up against Gerry Adams or anybody else. Dolores Price was obsessed with Gerry Adams and very clearly wanted to bring him down. So she was willing to give evidence against him and would have quite happily done so.
I'm not sure she would have done so.
Yeah, her evidence would have been credible.
I'm not sure that she would have gone
into
court on it, but I do think that that's a very good point to make, because it underlines how the politics of this has played out. Dolores did that interview with Alison Morris in 2010, and that interview was manipulated by the Sunday Life following the publication of it. Their reporting made it appear as if they heard the Boston College tapes, which was virtually impossible because the interviews that Anthony McIntyre had conducted with Dolores did not discuss the McConville case. So there's no way the Sunday Life's report...
Anthony McIntyre is your husband.
Yes.
And he was present for the interview that Dolores Price gave, is that right?
He conducted the interviews with the Republican side of the Oral History Project. And the point is that that was in 2010 that this was conducted. The Irish News was never approached until 16 months after that interview was conducted, when it was pointed out in court that the police had not gone to the Irish News or the Sunday Life and said, well, here's this information, this new information, here's somebody coming forward, give us your notes. Now, obviously, they would have the different kind
Are you
of fight.
saying that in the interview, the Boston College taped interview that your husband gave, that your husband did with Dolores Price, that she didn't, in that interview, mention Gerry Adams' involvement in the murder of Jean McConville?
As what I know and what has been said in the affidavit of my husband, the Boston College interview that he conducted with her did not discuss the McConville case.
Right.
I think that there are, you know, before we get lost in the minutiae of this case, I mean, there are much bigger issues at stake here. I mean, I think sometimes that people, it's very understandable why the McConville family want justice in relation to what happened to their mother. So do many, many other families. But the thing is, I think sometimes I think that people forget that in the Good Friday Agreement, these issues were supposed to have been dealt with in a different way. You know, we decommissioned the weapons, we let the prisoners out of jail. This was all supposed to be in the past, the whole thing of criminal prosecutions. But the problem now is that there hasn't been anything to replace that. And it's more and more obvious that there is a need for it. I mean, there's a lot of attention at the moment in the Republic and in the UK and even around the world to the Jean McConville case because of the prominence of Gerry Adams, which is kind of natural. But the fact is that in the North at the moment, if you look at the papers and if you listen to the news every single day, there is some story dominating which is about the pain of some family who have been denied justice, whether it's the victims of the Le Mans bombing, the victims of the Ballymurphy massacre, victims of loyalist collusion with security forces. The past is a huge live issue in the North, and people here and elsewhere are ignoring that.
They've decommissioned the weapons, but they've recommissioned the past. And this is, instead of having these be a legacy issue that is laid to rest, it's handed on.
But still, isn't it fair that the people, that the relatives of the victims of the conflict in Northern Ireland know what happened to their...
Well, that's what they want to know. I mean,
absolutely.
Yeah,
but
Helen
also,
McKendry
isn't it
says
fair
she may not
that
get...
people are brought to justice for these horrific deeds?
But what kind of justice are you going to get? And as John Larkin had pointed out, the mechanisms in the legislation that's been agreed by the very politicians that pretend they don't know what they've agreed to is that at the maximum, people will serve 2 years if a successful prosecution can even be brought or a conviction can be obtained. And the likelihood of a conviction being obtained, given the fact that you're talking about 40 years ago, 30 years ago, it's very little.
Vincent, it's also worth pointing out
I want to go to a few other matters, but
just to say that the Commission on the Disappeared, which has done enormous work in relation to this issue, they actually offer a form of limited immunity to people who give evidence which could lead to the discovery of the remains of the disappeared. So there's already a sort of a model of that there.
One of the people who was very much involved with Gerry Adams in the peace process was the Redemptorist priest Alec Reid, and he was involved at every step of the peace process, and he was the person who talked to Gerry Adams, who was prompted by Gerry Adams to go and see Charlie Haughey in 1986 before Charlie Haughey became Taoiseach again, and he was the person who was intricately involved in building bridges between the IRA and the British government, eventually the Irish government and the British government. And he knew intimately what Gerry Adams did. And for a documentary done by TV3 on Sinn Féin, Alec Reid was interviewed, and this is a snippet of what he said about Gerry Adams.
I say, there was a man sent by God whose name was John, you know. It was part of the Bible, John the Baptist. Well, there was a man sent, I would say that Gerry Adams was a man sent by God. In other words, he was part of God's providence for peace in Ireland, and he had the ability, to do that and to achieve that.
That's an extraordinary thing for him to have said. And particularly extraordinary for him to have said that, because you remember the killing of the Sioux soldiers who drove accidentally into a funeral cortege where IRA people were being buried, and they were brutally murdered. And he was the priest who went to them, tried to give them some solace, gave them the last rites, and his face was smeared with their blood, that because he tried to give them the kiss of life. And this fellow, this was an apostle for peace, really. And he says this about Gerry Adams, sent by God.
Well, hopefully he didn't say that to the dying men.
But
Gerry will come and save you with his peace. He's sent by God a few years later.
But it does suggest that it does suggest an admiration for the role that Adams played in the peace process.
Well, I mean, I think myself that there's been rather too many men sent by God to Northern Ireland, and we could do without most of them. But I mean, as far as Gerry, you have to hand it to Gerry Adams that he did play an enormous role in the peace process, and it also has to be admitted that a lot of the people who are his most fervent enemies are those who resent the fact that he engaged in the peace process and who think that it was a betrayal of the armed struggle and the cause of
and it was,
the IRA.
And it was, of course, it was a betrayal, yeah.
But he also played a large part in the war.
That's right. That's right. That's right. It's an extraordinary feature of him.
Yeah.
But the one thing you can say about the war is the war would have gone on without Gerry Adams.
Absolutely.
But you can't be sure the peace process would have gone on without Gerry Adams.
Well,
you certainly can't say that.
You can't be sure that it wouldn't have ended sooner without Gerry Adams. I mean,
all right, yeah. All right, yeah. Just one further thing. In that interview with Alec Reid, the Redemptorist priest, he also talked about his role in identifying where the disappeared had been buried. And this wasn't part of the documentary that was published, but this was part of the interview that was done for the documentary. Just have a look at this.
Well, what happened there was, I think, people disappeared, and the presumption was that they were shot by the IRA. That was a presumption. Then Gerry Adams said publicly that if they had shot people, they should say they shot them and why they shot them, in order that to help their families. So, I don't know many, but what they did was then the IRA leadership at the time, the IRA leadership that decided after Gerry Adams asked them to do it, that they would give information about the people that had been shot and why they had been shot. But the IRA leadership, this was all that had all happened 20 years before. So the contemporary IRA leadership hadn't a clue who was shot or why they were shot. And we were stuck because the IRA who shot them were gone. So what they did was a kind of a clever thing. They spent a whole year looking for the people who dug the graves. You know, the IRA had shot them maybe 20 years before, and they spent a whole year, I remember, going around trying to find the men who had dug the graves for these people. And then I used to meet them with balaclavas on them, and we'd go into a field and they'd say, I can remember being in a big field one day and they said to me, look, there are 2 bodies in this field.
Go ahead.
It's that indulgence of the fudge of Gerry Adams that has prolonged this. I mean, to listen to what he's saying, and as if he actually believed it, is staggering. That they're trying to say, well, 20 years ago we didn't know, when this is the man that's alleged to have ordered these things and would have very well known, and prolonging the agony of the families that are looking for the bodies of their loved ones and still can't find them. It's sickening.
I think it's interesting just looking at what Adams has said in his statement about the arrest, when he said, I've never dissociated myself from the IRA and I never will. It's as if he is actually gradually moving towards some sort of position where he might just admit that he was involved. But I mean, as far as...
Sorry, we've got to go to a break. After the break, we'll have just a minute or two after the break, and we're going to show you the front page of the Irish Daily Mail. Join us then. Our show pal Paul asked, is the arrest of Gerry Adams by the PSNI a genuine effort to solve the murder of Jean McConville? And 54% said yes and 46% said no. Let's go to the front page of the Irish Daily Mail. Family of murdered Jean McConville vow to sue Sinn Féin leader for everything he owns. We want to bankrupt Gerry Adams over death of our mum. Also, there are thousands are moving the dial. That's the Pat Kenny, Sean O'Rourke competition for listeners in the mid-morning. This thing about bankrupting Gerry Adams, I don't know how that will work.
I think that the McConville family, and I've met many members of the McConville family, they are very bitter and very angry, and their families have been extremely damaged, and the birth children of Jean McConville are estranged from each other and angry with each other, and the damage is immeasurable. And like many other families who were similarly suffered injustice during the Troubles, they say these things. They say these things and they mean them. It doesn't mean that it's actually in any way going to happen, but it is indicative of the deep pain and distress and anger that is there.
I think that this is actually the potential for civil action is what has motivated the PSNI's move to get the access to the Boston Archives. As has been noted in various places.
If that's so, it's utterly improper by the PSNI.
Totally. And this is one of the things that we've objected to and raised with the U.S. government in terms of why they facilitated the Imlot request in the first place and why the subpoena's been sealed.
Because they're trying to solve a murder.
Well, but based on what? And when you look at the Imlot, I don't want to lose too much in the detail, but the Imlot says you have to have the ability, a successful prosecution, it should be successful to be able to request this stuff. We strongly believe that the motivation was to get access via a criminal investigation to the Boston College material, which would never be able to use to secure a conviction, but once released as criminal evidence, would then be able to be used in a civil action. And we think that's always been the end game.
Susan, do you think Sinn Féin is damaged by this?
I think that they may be damaged in the Republic, in the sense that it's kind of dragging them back into dark times that they'd rather not be reminded of, while their new generation in the Republic is convincing the public that they're really good at dealing with the modern contemporary Ireland and issues of cuts and austerity and so on. I think that they will deter maybe some people who might have voted for Sinn Féin who wouldn't be hardcore Sinn Féin voters, but it won't deter people who are solid Sinn Féin voters, north or south. I don't think, they're not going. Who are people going to move to in the north, for example? They're not.
Okay, that's it for now. For more on tonight's programme, log on to tv3.ie. The weather's next from us tonight. Good night.